John?
Sure. Well, entities is a word that probably makes mainstream Christian believers a little uncomfortable, because they're very comfortable with the traditional translations of the kinds of entities that are in the Bible. So they're used to talking about God and the devil and Satan and angels and demons. And that sort of about encompasses everything. And so the whole of reality has to fit in these boxes of animal, vegetable, mineral, God, the devil, angels or demons, and there's nothing else. And one of the problems with that is that it doesn't describe our experience, our lived experience. People have anomalous experiences, close encounters, and there's no language available there to describe what's happening. So that's one problem. But the other problem is that those translations don't do justice to the spectrum of entities in the Bible. So we come to the Elohim, and we're used to seeing that word translated as God or gods, but it can be translated as landlords or chieftains. It can refer to angels, and it can refer to negative entities. Why is there that great elasticity? And one of the things I argue in my Eden series is we should leave it untranslated and watch what the Elohim do, watch how they behave. So the Elohim is the Bible's earliest word that gets translated as God. There's an entity called El Shaddai. People are used to hearing that translated as the Almighty. But if you go to the most authoritative lexicons like Brown Drivers Briggs, or to very transparent Bible translations like the New Jerusalem Bible, they'll tell you squarely that's an invented translation. It really means the powerful one, the destroyer. Then we have El Elyon, the powerful one, more powerful than the other powerful ones, is essentially what that means. And then we have Yahweh, which is a word with no meaning. It's a mystery word with no etymology in the Hebrew language. Again, we have to watch how that entity behaves to work out what's going on there. We have entities who have names, like Asherah and Dagon, who are beings remembered by the ancients for their tutelage in agronomy. These beings came from far away, came to the planet and taught our ancestors how to become farmers and how to build civilizations. We read words like angels and we think we know what it means, except it hasn't told us what kind of entity we're looking at. The word angel just means something on a mission or on an assignment with a message. And we look at how some of those behave, and you and I would begin to think, hang on, we have a different word for that in the 21st century. And if you leave some of these key words untranslated, just leave them as they are in the text. Look at how they behave, and you'll begin to recognize patterns of arrival from outer space, arrival through portals, flying technology, military technology, new information provided to humanity. And you realize that we've got a whole sequence of close encounters and experiences of first contact being described. The technology of portaling is named. So if we read Genesis 11 and read that alongside the Sumerian stories, the suggestion is that there were beings coming and going from ancient Iraq through Stargate technology and portal technology.
When you look at the Great Pyramid, for example, it definitely is not a tomb. I mean, you can clearly see there's no hieroglyphs in there. When you begin to look at what's been discovered in some of the hidden shafts, and I've been all in and throughout that pyramid into so many places that people in this world will never even get a chance to see. I just took 140 people there in October on a private tour, and I stayed inside the Great Pyramid for over 6 hours. Even went down the subterranean shaft, which nobody gets a chance to go down. And there's markings in some of these little tiny tunnels and shafts that are markings like electrical markings, positive, negative, grounding. There's also an aspect of the Great Pyramid, they call it the Queen's Chamber, which looks like an electrolysis unit that would extract hydrogen from the water and shoot it through the shafts. There's so much technology built into this thing, I come to understand that it now is a multifunctional stone computer and a power generator. It does both. And even inside the King's Chamber, where there seems to be this crystal granite box, that crystal granite box was added to that room at a much later date. You can tell by the way it's constructed and the way it's sitting there. And that box is the same dimensions as the Ark of the Covenant, which means that's what used to sit inside of it. More than likely, because as the Nile meandered away from the pyramid, you had a situation where the water that was running underneath the crystal granite was not creating any more physiostatic electricity. So the pyramid for the most part, was broken. The machine was broken. But that particular device added a power boost to what it was generating, and was sending that through the apex of the pyramid. And the evidence of this is that in that room, there's evidence of a huge explosion where a part of that granite box that they're trying to say was a sarcophagus is missing. A huge corner piece is missing, and you could look across the room 20 feet away where it impacted solid granite and left the same exact indentation in the solid granite that it impacted across the room. So there was an explosion in that room at some point, a massive energetic explosion. So when you walk into the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, you're standing inside of an actual power generation unit. You're standing inside of something that used to be used to create energy. So you're standing inside of a machine, which is wild. It's a gigantic machine. It also has so many things added to it and built into the structure. The encoded knowledge in the structure itself is mind-blowing. From just multiplying the stones by the base, you can get the days in the year, the days in a tropical year, a sidereal year. You can get the distance from the earth to the moon based on the calculations of the stones in the pyramid, the distance from the earth to the sun, the circumference of the sun. You can even get the speed of the earth on its axis, and you can even get the speed of the earth around the sun. You can get the speed of the sun around the Milky Way supermassive black hole, and even the speed of the Milky Way around its local cluster. So we're talking about a time capsule of astrophysical knowledge combined with the fact that it also generated electricity, and I think it also sent out communications on the hydrogen frequency. We know the Dogon tribe, they were the original inhabitants of Egypt, the Dogons, before they got taken over and moved out to Mali, Africa, where they've been for thousands of years. But they know about a trinary star system named Sirius. They knew about that long before astrophysicists in the world knew it existed. They knew about the orbitable period of those 3 stars that orbit each other in that star system, and one of those stars can't be seen with the naked eye. And they claim that this knowledge was brought to them by the Nomo, beings that used to live on a planet orbiting that star before it ran out of fuel and turned into a white dwarf. They came to Earth to create a breakaway civilization. They brought that knowledge with them. Then we have the indigenous peoples of the Americas, the Hopi, the Lakota. They have the same story. The Star Brothers brought them the knowledge of the stars. The Mayans, they were brought by the sky gods. They brought the knowledge, right? So no matter where you go on this planet, all of a sudden we keep hearing the same story. The Aboriginals that I did a walkabout in the Australian outback. They told me that their verbal handed down history for thousands of years was that we were seeded on this planet by Pleiadians. Same thing with the Hopi tribe. I mean, I can go on and on and on. So we have evidence of some type of contact evidence through histories that have been handed down and even written in text that occurred at some point. The book of Enoch, which is not in the Bible, even though Enoch was highly revered because he's mentioned as being highly revered in the Bible, but his book was left out. Why was his book left out of the Bible? Well, his book talks about beings coming from space to Earth, engaging mankind, teaching us how to make weapons, perfume, makeup, how to make beer and hang out and have fun and all these crazy things. And then they take Enoch in a ship and take him to space and they bring him back. In the Bible, they claim he never came back. He went to heaven without even having died. No, it was an appointed departure date where he left all of the information to his sons on how to run the estate. And then he came back in the future, years later, but he was brought back to Earth again. And so they decided, well, we better not put this alien abduction inside the Bible, so we'll leave this book out. The only Bible that has a copy of the book of Enoch in it is the Ethiopian Bible. That's one of the oldest Bibles that exist. So we know we have these encounters, so they must have had technology. The book of Ezekiel in the Bible, the wheels within wheels, another UFO sighting in the biblical text. The ancient Egyptians claimed that he ruled over the land of Kemet before it was Egypt for 16,000 years. So yeah, I think he was a real person. And so did the Mayans of Chichen Itza and Teotihuacan and the Aztecs as well. And I mean, that can go around the world. In Australia, he was known as Thoth to the Australians. He was known as Wang Di as the first emperor of China. He was known as Thor, Odin, Mercury in Europe. I mean, this guy's been everywhere. And, he's Viracocha, Lorpakal, Kukulkan. I mean, I can just keep going on and on and on. Many, many names over many eons around this entire planet. His influence has been incredible. And he is the bringer of knowledge to the world, to mankind, the teacher of languages. And so we're talking about a person that's extremely important, an extremely important figure in history that really was the person that created the blueprint for building an advanced city. So if you look at Kemet, you find out that in the Emerald Tablets, in the opening scene, the flood waters are beginning to reside, and this guy is coming there with a crew. He's coming on a ship. Now, this ship doesn't sail out into the ocean. It says that he upwardly rose into the morning, upwardly rose into the sky until the earth disappeared. We're talking about a ship that's going into space. And then when he gets to the place appointed and the time appointed, he looks beneath the ship and he sees the people of the land of the children of Kem, and he sees ancient temples coming up out of the mud. So he descends from the sky down to the land, opens his door, and he comes out with a crew, and those people come to attack him because obviously they're trying to defend their territory or whatever. He holds up his staff and he sends out a ray of vibration at these people, which stops them still like fragments of stone of the mountain. So he has a stun gun that freezes people in place and prevents them from attacking, just like we have this active denial system in the military. It does the same exact thing. I talk about it in my book. It's an identical frequency beam weapon that's non-lethal. And then he begins to rebuild the land of Kem. He says, I'm here to bring you back up to a high level of civilization. Bring back up. We're talking about previously it was already at a high level before this huge great flood. Now he's here to come and teach them how to become masters of their own destiny again and rebuild civilization. And then he tells his crew, once they rebuild the land of Kem completely, which took years, he said, now go around the planet and duplicate what we did here. And that's why no matter where you go on this planet, you'll see similar structures, similar building techniques all around the entire planet. We see the evidence of this advanced culture, advanced knowledge, and advanced wisdom all really bottlenecking from one master architect and also intelligencer that then went and visited these kingdoms all around the world and left his fingerprint there everywhere you could think.
That description of Enlil and that little point I wanted to make of how it's confusing to how Enlil could play the role as an enlightener. How is that possible, right? Well, it looks like he switched roles in another zodiac later in the Old Testament to be a cruel and wicked controller of mankind, potentially even influencing us to be like a war empire, to fight and annihilate each other. Think about the contrast there. So this figure starts out as being a cruel and jealous god that wants mankind to be created as almost like a bit of a labor force, but in like more of the physical dimension of reality. That's what we're created for in his eyes. And then wants to wipe us out and destroy us, but then Enki allows this Noah and his sons to survive, and then he changes roles and becomes the enlightener of the golden age. What does this mean? Well, look at all like the legend of Etana, these other tablets. Clearly, these Anuna have been playing these distinctive roles within the dualistic aspect of our reality, playing positive and negative roles throughout zodiacal time periods over and over again. Positive, negative, positive, negative. And that seems to be their obsession, and it seems to be what they're allowed to do. And that is why it seems to be so confusing that it goes from being a negative influence to a positive influence to a negative influence, you know what I mean? That seems to be the reason behind it. But what are we? I mean, are we purely physical beings? I mean, really, we're more of a spiritual, multidimensional consciousness that resides on the universal plane that exists of all knowledge, but we are incarnated into a physical being, right? I think they're the same thing. Okay. I don't think there's as many similarities between them and us as we think, except for the fact that they are far more advanced than we could ever imagine right now in our existence. And it's some confusion on whether or not, because time isn't linear and how our understanding of reality is skewed based on a very limited basis, that some believe, and there are interesting correlations with the fact that they could even be us in the future somehow. When you look at the Anuna, this figure right here is one of them. They have this statement they always say in the tablets. They call themselves the ordainers of destinies. And they always talk about time. And they always talk about how they have moments where they have to interject something at a specific time, and how they're often considered like time lords and all these associations with them. And even the greatest Assyriologist, Sumerian expert in history in my mind, George Smith, at the end of the Chaldean account of Genesis, again, he concludes about the Anuna and their influences on civilization and humanity that it doesn't make any sense to look at the Anuna, the Anunnaki Anuna, other than through the lens of the fact that they seem to have come here to this realm at different time periods in history for very specific reasons. That's what he said. He didn't know why. I mean, he could speculate, but this is from the 1800s. And so we're looking at something, I think, that's far greater than a lot of people want to understand. That we're part of a story that's so much more powerful and so much more of a divine connection that is more like a war in heaven that's being manifested on earth, and that everything that's been happening here is about this battle over humanity reaching ascension and going through these periods of going through war and destruction and then rising up, because I believe that's as a law of correspondence, and we're about to see their obsession with that in the artifact here in a second, Will. But everything was based on that for them. So there seemed to be some kind of a war over what we would become and what we would allow to become, that seemed to be being manifested at different points here throughout history, where great knowledge was lowered and we reached these states of building pyramids and temples that would align with the stars, and divinity within Earth and the universe itself, to points where we forget everything, moments where we forget everything and who we are, and then feel like we're just some kind of an ant that's in an infinite universe that doesn't matter.
Obviously, the universe is a vast place, and there are like infinite planets and microbial and other life that undoubtedly exists throughout the universe. I mean, we know that, and maybe even hominid life. We don't know, and I think all of that is very much possible. But I do not think that the evidence we're seeing around the world and how we're viewing things like 𝗪𝗪𝗛𝗪, right, this winged god passing all this, it should be viewed through an extraterrestrial alien viewpoint. I don't. I think that actually causes more damage than it does good, because it changes the mentality of how we view these things happening. I do not think that beings in a craft came down and taught humanity things. I don't think that's how it went. The more that I've really gotten into it, studying the greatest Assyriologists, Sumerian experts, George Smith, Samuel Kramer, other geniuses, Austin Henry Layard, these individuals that were trying to understand the Anunna, right, the Sumerian pantheon of gods, and how these fit into humanity, and how all of this knowledge coming from seemingly nowhere can give rise to entire civilizations. I mean, look at the Sumerians. They literally invented everything we can think of, from metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, the first laws, the first writing, the first currency. You could go on and on. Everything was invented there, but they say that it literally gets handed down to them. And it's handed down, it's this idea of kingship through this concept of what are called 𝗲s, 𝗲''S. I don't know if you've heard of those yet, but in cuneiform tablets like Enki and the World Order and others, you learn that the 𝗲s are like divine statutes. They're laws and rules and understandings of creating a civilization that are handed down to a culture. Now, that's the first thing you can say is, oh, well, clearly it didn't come from us. It was given to us. Well, then where did it come from? This has been something that I've struggled with for well over 10 years to try to understand. What are the Anunna? What are they? What are they? Are they, again, what I've had to come to is that I think a lot of individuals have gotten maybe this area inaccurate. Do not think they're aliens that have come here. I think they're actually much more powerful than that, much more important than that. Is every way they're described. Okay, they ordain the destinies of us. They watch timelines. They're somehow in charge of maintaining balance on this planet. And that's where it gets wild. Looking at the altar at Ionis and looking at what the Keph box relief is showing, they seem to be in charge of maintaining balance here. So what kind of beings are we talking about? Think about that for a minute. How can you maintain cycles on the earth, cycles in the cosmos? You're adhering to cycles. What are they? Well, I think it gets more into how Thoth describes in ancient Egyptian writings as some kind of a cycle master being. Okay, that's what he calls them. He calls them the cycle masters. Okay, and they're very powerful. They're not like some being that, just like can die and then disappears. They seem to almost be eternal. First of all, they seem to be eternal, and they seem to be like billions of years old. Okay. And it seems to be something where they came here to create some kind of an experience with celestial souls, beings like us, that can come here and have experiences that are in this perfectly balanced type of world. But also, not only that, but have an entire game woven into it. That's like, there's a game where our souls seem to be constantly governed and also watched and judged. I think the best word to do is judged. And based on that judgment, our own cycles are determined in our growth with spirituality and consciousness based on these laws and rules that seem to be woven. And let me give you an example. Let's say you are someone who eats really healthy, has a pretty good mindset, has learned a lot about the understandings of things around them. They're right on the edge of progressing to this higher place. but they're still having some issues in their life, like they still can be mean and they're not accepting of people, or they have this trauma or this pain in their life that they haven't fully dealt with. That person will be stuck at that place energetically as long as until they deal with that. Who's governing that? I asked that question, who is governing us being able to unlock, to progress on this soul path? Well, in ancient tablets from Sumer throughout Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki call themselves the ordainers of destinies, and that they manage cycles basically here. And the more I wrap my head around that, I'm like, wait a minute, so what are they then? Well, they seem like we're essentially them, but in a way where we haven't figured out what we are. In that golden age of us, figured out what we are, and then they unlocked it, and they reached that great potential. I think the potential of what our golden age ancestors achieved is beyond our comprehension. I think that's where all the great teachers like Buddha, Krishna, Jesus all came out of that knowledge of that, okay? And they were the teachers that were scattered throughout the ages that are trying to teach mankind. No, remember what you used to know. Remember what you are. Don't be distracted by these illusions.